What up boys and welcome back to another theory video. Today we're going to cover a topic I would like to name the deck roll triangle. Applying this theory correctly would enable you to change the role of any deck within any matchup to give you a better chance of winning. I'd say learning this theory improves my personal chances of winning a bad matchup by at least 50%. Especially if my opponent doesn't recognize that I've changed my deck's role. This theory is all about looking at how your opponent is using the 8 cards in their deck, and then changing how you're using your 8 cards in your deck to give you an advantage in the matchup. Before I get into explaining it, I just want to give a quick background as to how I came up with this video concept. This theory is inspired by Seth's old deck archetype triangle, however it's more modern and up to date. That triangle looked at games from old competitive events like the Clash Royale North American Open, and has fallen out of fashion with many of the changes made to the game. For example, it claimed that Beatdown generally has the matchup over Siege, but what about Mortar Bait? This is technically a Siege deck that would ruin Golem due to its high punish abilities and good defenses versus the Golem. And while Seth's triangle was a good one for its time, I think my deck rolls triangle is more well suited for Clash Royale in 2020. Now let me start off by outlining the basics of the triangle. The 3 roles we have are the investments role, the punishments role, and the counter push role. In short, punishing beats investing, investing beats counter pushing, and counter pushing beats punishing. We'll go into this more in a sec, but the most important thing to note here is that no specific cards are listed in the triangle, only how you would play the cards. In Seth's old triangle, Beatdown would constitute a Giant or a Golem deck, Siege would constitute an Expo or a Mortar deck, and Control would constitute a Miner or Hog Rider deck. Whilst the label of investment may make you think of cards like the aforementioned Giant, there's no reason as to why Giant cannot be played in the role of a punishment or counter push. And that there is the beauty of talking about deck roles opposed to deck archetypes. This theory will actually give you a way to understand how your opponent is playing and how you should be playing in response. An archetype triangle simply tells you what your opponent is playing and what you should be playing in response, which doesn't really help you when you're already stuck in that horrible quadruple tank matchup versus your Expo. Of course, you know this dude is running Beatdown and that you're running Siege, but how on earth does that actually help? It doesn't really, but understanding deck roles will. Let's talk about the triangle. At the top we have investment, to the left we have punishment, which counters investing, and to the right of punishment we have counter push, which counters punishment but loses to investment. Let's take a quick rundown of how these matchups work, and how you can use this triangle to turn a losing scenario into a winning scenario. Let's start with using an investment plan and facing a punishment plan, where the punishment plan should win. A good example of this is a Giant deck. When you invest, your opponent's punishment plan will work, seeing as your investment has put you down a lot of elixir. So instead of falling into this investment trap, take a look at the deck roll triangle and use the strategy that counters punishment: counter-attacking. Hold your tank and wait for them to play their punishing win condition. Defend it with your support units and put your tank in front of these at the river. Because their punish attack won't last too long, it's not enough time for a poison to really kill any of your defending units. Other spells like lightning are too expensive to spend in this time, and fireball barely kills anything. This means that your support units generally live here, and you'll be able to throw a tank in front to punish their aggression. You now have your big push built without your opponent punishing, and will probably go forth to get more damage than your opponent did. Switching your game plan meant that you went from using your investing plan and losing damage to using a counter-attacking plan and gaining damage. Now let's switch it up a bit. Let's say you go into a game with a counter-attacking mindset. A good example of this is a lot of Goblin Giant decks. If you were to face an investment deck, a counter push plan would attempt to play into the investment and stack defensive units for the counter push. Because investment pushes usually last a long time, your defending units will mostly die to your opponent's support and spells, all whilst they're generating elixir as well. Here your counter push is either going to be really frail and they're going to be able to clean it up easily with just spells, or it's just going to totally die on the defense. If you take a look at the deck roll triangle, what you should do here is punish instead of look for the counter push. Play your win condition at the river when they invest and force your opponent to defend. Then focus on gaining an easy defense onto the investment that your opponent was forced to abandon. Once again, we can see that with the same deck in the same matchup, you can produce a different result just by using the deck roll triangle to alter the way in which you use your 8 cards. Finally, let's talk about being a punishment plan against a counter push plan. A good example of a punish is a Hog Rider deck. This is usually a bad matchup against a counter-attacking plan because you're mostly playing into them with your punish play all game and then allowing them to counter-attack. Your opponent is likely to just wait until you play Hog Rider, then defend it with their units and push heavy afterwards. You won't really have time or elixir to use spells with your quick Hog push, so usually their units will survive and form a counter-attack. This can cause you to get very minimal damage but take a load due to your opponent's elixir lead. This may be the most difficult transition to make, but here you should take a look at the triangle and try to switch your plan from punishment to investment. Hog decks that run tanks like P.E.K.K.A. or Mega Knight have the best time with this, as they can build a push around this bigger tank. When your opponent tries to defend this investment, hoping to counterattack, your units and spells will blow away their defending units and allow you to get damage without facing their much desired counter push. And so, there is a brief rundown of how this triangle functions and examples of how your deck can be mixed up and played with multiple dimensions. Ultimately, it's going to take a little bit of improvisation from yourself to actually make use of this concept's full potential. Anyway, with that said, let's talk more about the free strategies themselves. Let's start with the first role. Investment. This is seen by some as the most simple way to play decks in Clash Royale. It consists of putting a beefy tank in the back and building a large push around it to take a tower. They often like to wait until double elixir before investing too much, but some lighter investment strategies may make their move sooner. When building a deck for investing, you want to be running cards around the 3 to 5 elixir mark that are also spell resistant. This allows you to put a tank in the back and build a big push against the counter pushing deck, but also allows you to defend against punish decks and beat them on the counter push because of your spell resistant units. Anything like Elixir Golem, Giant, Lava Hound, Golem, and Free Muskies mainly suit the investment role. So, to put it short, building a big push is the main focus of these decks, but they can often switch into the counter-attacking playstyle when matched up against their countering punish deck. This punishment role was directly developed in order to counter the investment role. Their plan usually requires a fast, high-damage attacker that your opponent can rarely afford to leave on their tower. Perfect examples of this would be Wall Breakers, Skeleton Barrel, Goblin Barrel, Hog Rider, Balloon, Royal Hogs, and Expo. So when you run this kind of deck, you're looking to match against an opponent with an investment strategy so you can fulfill the deck roll triangle. However, if you meet a counter pusher, you'll likely need to switch your game plan to investment and building a push instead. This can be done by simply placing an ice golem and support in the back before pushing, allowing more of your opponent's defensive units to die on their side of the board before they're able to counter push. Alternatively, if you're running one of those decks with a heavier unit like P.E.K.K.A., you can place her in the back to cause a much larger offensive threat to your opponent. One of my favourite decks of all time is P.E.K.K.A. Hog for this exact reason. It feels so easy to sway the more difficult counter-pushy matchups in my favour with a P.E.K.K.A. in the back. And finally, we have the counter-attacking role. This role is probably the newest of the three, and is probably the one that sets this entire triangle in motion. You're looking to defend against your opponent's smaller pushes in order to use your defensive value to overrun them on the counter push. Examples of prevalent counter-attacking decks would be Miner, Mortar, Bridge Spam, Graveyard, Ram Rider, Giant Goblin, and the Royal Giant. These decks primarily look to take on the defensive role, awaiting an opponent's attack that they can defend. However, if the opponent is using an investment strategy, the counter-attacking plan can switch into a punish plan and quickly rush the river to put the opponent under immense pressure. This might have become the strongest game plan in Clash Royale at the moment, as its ability to switch between counterattack and punish is near seamless, giving it almost no bad matchups. This deck roll theory isn't really about any specific cards inside of Clash Royale, it's more so about how you use them. For example, if you keep giving your opponent counterattacking value by using a Hog Rider, you should maybe start your pushes with a P.E.K.K.A. in the back and use the Hog Rider later. I think it would be easy to confuse this theory with Seth's old archetype triangle, especially because I related the two at the start of this video. But really, it's just about how you use the cards in your deck to overcome opposing game plans that may counter you. I think this is definitely one of the newest skills to Clash Royale, and so I thought I would make a quick video on it. If you did enjoy today's content, then be sure to drop us a subscription and whatnot to stay up to date with the latest and greatest Clash Royale strategy. Also, a big shout out to my Patreons Demonetized and Jacob Grahalva for keeping this channel alive. You boys are the absolute best. Anyway lads, that's all I got for this deck roll theory. Thank you all for watching, I hope you did enjoy, and peace.